right, welcome back to Beers in the Attic. I am your host, Dominic Smith, always with my co-host, Broc Arnice. And tonight, it's going to be a good night.
It's going to be a great night.
Because what we like, what we enjoy, it's all about the relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going to dive into. But as always, what do we have on tap? We're sticking with our Alpine tonight.
Yeah, I don't think we ventured too far out from this.
Sure didn't.
No.
So
you asked me to pick up beer, and I was like, should I? And you know what?
And it just kind of kept it the same.
Yeah.
So cheers to that. I appreciate
Cheers,
that. Thanks for picking it up.
Yeah.
Our official sponsor, I haven't told you.
Oh, no. So
we got an official sponsor.
okay. Is our official our previous unofficial?
Yes, it is.
Nice.
So they were very excited that we said
really close to the mic.
They were excited that we said they were unofficial. So now
Yeah.
they have officially become official.
Cool.
Right,
So
so-
we can go and get like a free appetizer, or
That's
like
what
how
they
does
said.
that work?
They
Just
said-
one.
They said actually it's only 10% off, but it still works.
Oh, okay.
So anyways, our
Unlimited
official-
cheese curds.
Our official sponsor, Oaks Tavern and Kitchen. We're super excited about that. And that's pretty much all we got, because now, I don't know about you, Broc, but I have been excited, maybe nervous.
Because you guys have similar thoughts and some. You guys have,
Right?
have you written a book about this too?
So I wrote a book on restorative practices. It was called Better Than Carrots or Sticks. And then all of a sudden, some buddies came out with this book called Hacking School Discipline. And everybody was like, get rid of the restorative practice carrots and sticks book. This is the new thing. And I said, I can't wait. We grabbed the book. Broc, myself, our other administrator, we dove into it. We started reading it. It's a fabulous book, Hacking School Discipline. And we called Brad and we said, Brad, will you come join us? And ladies and gentlemen, we got Brad Weinstein here with us tonight.
Super excited.
Super excited. So, Brad, as we always do, people want to get to know you a little bit more. People want to know who Brad is. So, a little intro. Who is Brad?
Man, that's a deep question. It's 9:23 in Indianapolis time,
man.
That's a little deep for this time of night. But I'm just I'm an educator at heart. Like some people do education as it's a job, but to most people who are in education, it's part of who they are. So I'm an educator at heart. I love working with kids. I love professional learning. I love working with adults. I connect really well with educators and that. But in addition to being an educator, in addition to getting to work with people all over the place and educators all over the place, I'm a father of a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 7-year-old, which keeps me very busy and very tired.
Yep.
As well.
Yeah.
But I just love connecting with people, social media, anything education I could go over. And first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. But when I get my time, I love to get into discipline, curriculum, and all those other things. I'm kind of a nerd where I don't really have many hobbies. My hobby is working on work, and my passions with that. So that's a little short snapshot of who I am.
Well, we like you, Brad. So that's a start.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before the podcast. I'm a fan. I'm definitely a fan.
And so Broc has 2 young children. I have 2 young children and a 6th grader. So we're
in the
definitely
same boat.
right
we
there
feel
with you.
feel the tiredness and feel, you're a father and a husband first, and then education and stuff comes after that. But I think having kids definitely helps out with thinking about how you handle students in the classroom too.
So,
Well,
exactly, right?
they test all my theories.
Those are your guinea pigs.
To the max. I'm going to tell you, when we're thinking about these concepts of discipline, I have the hardest time with my own kids because you know them and they push your buttons quicker sometimes than a kid you see at school because they're directly living with you. So it's definitely good practice for these practices for sure. Yeah. And they have pushed some of the boundaries of my discipline capabilities as well.
So when we're talking about that, let's get right to it.
Okay.
Broc and I, 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, started to stumble around the meaning of restorative practices, restorative justice. And when we looked at it and we saw what this could do for kids, we said, that's what we needed. That's what would have benefited us. And then we started to say, actually, I think some teachers did this while we were in school, and our football coaches, they did this, and they showed us that relationships matter, and consequences really didn't change us.
It doesn't change your behavior.
It didn't change the behavior at all. It was
learn to find a way to get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't really help us. So we jumped into this and we said, we have to push this into our school. We have to make this our norm. And then, lucky enough, we wrote about it. We started talking about it. We started to do more work about it. And now there are more people. Everybody's trying to do it. But as you have probably experienced, Brad, there's some places that do restorative practices and restorative justice really, really well. And then there's some places that hate restorative practices and restorative justice because they say there's no accountability.
It's a process.
It's a process. Kids get away with it. So in your best definition, in your best thinking, what is restorative practices? What is restorative justice, and why is it important?
Sure. When we're thinking about restorative practices, there's various definitions of them. And when I'm thinking about restorative practices, it's a relationship-based approach to not just working when kids do something wrong and repairing the harm, but I look at it as a way of being, a mindset. It's forging relationships and forming those relationships. It is feeding those relationships, and it is repairing those relationships when things go awry. That's really what it is. People like to talk about, the consequences and the reactive side and all of those other variables, but it's just an opportunity to take what might otherwise be harm and turn that into an opportunity to, build that relationship deeply understand what the kid is going through, drive empathy through the process. And it's really just a way to take situations and instead of just kicking kids out of classrooms or kicking kids out of, my site or things like that, I like to think of it as, how did I make that kid feel like they were part of my community in the first place? And that's a part that I feel is sorely lacking when it comes to restorative practices, is the pre-work, the work you had to do to not just do that icebreaker on the first or second day of school and think, oh, that kid, I know their third favorite reptile and I know their favorite color. So now we have a relationship, right?
Yeah.
The reality is what we're missing is that middle component with a feeding component of that relationship is intentional every single day, every single week. And when I do have something go wrong in the classroom, I've built that social capital with that kid and they respect me and they know that I respect them. So when things do go awry, there's going to be conflict no matter how bad, no matter how good I am of a teacher, no matter how good I am as an administrator, no matter how much the kids know that I love them, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be things that people say that they shouldn't, actions people do that they shouldn't. But it's all about building that social capital. It's about that, social, emotional component to learning that is integrated into the work. It's not just fixing kids who do things wrong in a new way instead of not punishing them. It's all about building, capacity to be able to understand, to emphasize, you know what I mean? Like we're not all born with empathy, and it's not an easy thing for some people. How do we build empathy for the kid that I might have harmed? But I think another missing component is, how do I, as an educator, build empathy for the kid who caused the harm? And I think that's something that's missed too, is just because one kid did something to another, I need to understand that kid and know that there's more to that story that caused them to lash out and caused them to feel like they had to cuss that kid out because they felt like, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I belonged in this classroom. I didn't feel whatever the case might be. So I just feel like it's a process for getting deeper and getting beneath the surface with kids. And also it's the second chance, third chance, fourth chance way of just not throwing kids away when they do something wrong. There's no instances, where kids they're at a point where they're too far gone. And that's just something that I truly believe. And these practices help with that kind of component. And it's not just for the kids that, that one kid over here, that one kid over there. It's a practice that benefits everyone and the community.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, one of the things that I was thinking and really enjoyed was the fact that you talk about it, how it's restorative work is a continuous cycle, and that it starts with building relationships with kids first. And I know that's something we talk about a lot, right? But it's about the importance of that, I think, to keep people from becoming numb to that phrase, is the fact that restorative work doesn't work if you don't have that foundation first, because then if you are using restorative work in a punitive fashion to just fix that immediate behavior and say, oh, but we're going to talk about it, that's still not restorative work. You know, you're still, it's being punitive with a touch of restoration, where there's like everything else isn't there. So that was big for me in hearing you talk about that, and like reminding people that, yes, we say relationships matter, but it's because that's the foundational like principle of this. And then the other thing that I had that came up, I have a quick question too, is like, you had talked about it's the second chance, third chance, fourth, and I saw Dom point at the monitor because that's, I know you were like, yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Because there's that stuff that we talk about all the time, and the reason for that is, I think some people then assume that there's no accountability because there is a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh chance. But I guess
with that too, though, there is the conversation of, well, there's 2, 3, 4, 5. Is 5 the final? Like, when's the final number?
Well, because
right?
people want to know, when can we become punitive?
Right, exactly.
When can I get my quick fix and feel better about how this kid made me feel?
Right.
You know, so I think that I agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean that, and I think that's where we'll, obviously start trending into this conversation is when we have this conversation of restorative work and we start to push and say, this is the right idea, the right practices, because it allows us to be human. It allows us to work with kids and build relationships. It allows us to hold students accountable in a different way, right? Because we're saying, it hurt me. It affected me. It hurt the school. It affected the school. It hurt your mom or your dad or your cousin or uncle and all that. And all of a sudden you'll see someone raise their hand and say, yeah, that sounds good, but like, when is enough? When do they get in trouble? And then it starts to trend back is, so the other question I have is, kids can fight each other, and if they talk, it's cool. And you get taken back because you're like, I never said that. I don't believe that. I there are natural consequences that comes with behavior, but what's our restoration? What's our idea? What's our plan? So when you think about that, Brad, and when you're working with teams and people start to push back on you and say, nope, no, thank you. I don't like that kumbaya stuff. I don't need that hug a thug approach crap over here. What do you say to them? What do you push back and start to navigate a conversation with around that issue?
Yeah, and that's it's very common that we get pushback. We tend to get pushback in the upper grades more than the lower grades to some extent because there's bigger behaviors. There's louder behaviors. They're big tantrums. They're tantrums when they're a kid, but when they get as we get older, the mindset of they should know better starts to come into play. Whereas I can understand a third grader throwing a tantrum and be empathetic with them, but once they get to the middle school and high school level, we think that they should know how to behave and and know how to be compliant, which is another negative word in the restorative world, right? So when we're thinking about that, what I say is, okay, so if your instance of kids getting in a fight and getting kicked out of school for 3 days and coming back immediately, and there was no restoration, what do you think is going to happen then with those two kids? Fight. If the kid at recess throws the rock and it bounces off the wall and hits the other kid in the eye, and your solution is to give them recess attention for the week, what's going to happen the next time you put those two in a group together and nothing has been repaired, nothing's been fixed? It's going to be awkward forever, right? So when we punish kids, we simply do something that makes the adult feel good-ish. It's something, it's a pound of flesh kind of thing where, I yell at the kid or I kick the kid out. And, the reality is it did absolutely nothing. A simple behavior such as being tardy, for example. If a kid is tardy, one kid is tardy because they just lollygag around. The other kid is tardy because they don't have the executive functioning skills to get everything packed up in time and get everything packed up, go, 100 yards to their next class and stop in the bathroom at the same time and go to their locker. They might not have those skills. And then the other kid is late because they're making out with their girlfriend in the hallway somewhere else walking her to class, right? So I put it like that. I was like, well, hypothetically, if things were black and white, those three situations would be the exact same punishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They would all have some sort of punishment for being late. The reality is I'm never going to punish a kid into better behavior if there's a gap in skill or a
Mm-hmm.
gap in understanding. So I like to put it back on them and say, what if punishment truly worked, would we have repeat offenders of
Mm-hmm.
crime?
Right.
Yeah.
Would people ever get in trouble again? Because people like to say, "Oh, that's a kiddie thing," and that's something that only young kids do. And then and then I'm like, well, it's prevalent in justice systems and it's prevalent in adults and in workplaces as well. So it's not just a kid-based thing. So I kind of just push back myself a little bit and say, if a kid is continually talking in your class, when they get in trouble, you're gonna are you hoping to like intimidate or scare them in some capacity to not talking, when the reality is that the reason why they're not acting the ways they should in your class is because they can't read at grade level.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're starting to talk, they're gonna save face, and instead of reading when it's their turn, they're gonna make a joke or they're gonna do something else, and they're never going to they're never going to get to the point where we're not going to punish them into the fact of becoming a more fluent reader. We're not going to punish them into having social emotional skills that they might be lacking in some capacity. So the reality is that it just does nothing but makes me feel better. It shows people that there is accountability for their actions, of course, right? Like if I do something and I get kicked out of class, there was an accountability component, but it doesn't teach. And I think discipline is to teach. So we look at this as we are teaching kids. And the other thing, the fun thing I like to say is that it is actually more accountability to repair the harm and to make things right
Yeah.
than it is to just get kicked out. An example would be at lunch, I leave trash all over my table. And my solution is that I take the kids' lunch away the next day with their friends because that'll teach them. The
Yeah.
reality is that if I have the kid clean, and not only if I have the kid clean, if I ask the kid, hey, when you didn't clean the table, it really caused the custodial crew, or it caused the teachers, some harm. And I might even bring somebody like, I might bring them in too. And like, how did this impact you when you had to clean up this extra milk on the floor? Well, I was 15 minutes late getting home and I didn't get to see my kids and pick them up on time. And you start building that empathy for the person that you harmed, not just the action. Like they don't understand the ripple effect of that. But if I, as a kid, have to hear how my actions impacted others, and I have to either apologize or I have to clean the tables, or I put on the kid, hey, what can you do to make it right? It's not a prescribed. The adult's always the one come up with the logical thing or the repair the harm. When that happens, I'm gonna be a lot less likely to leave my trash on the floor or on the table next time because I had to clean the table, and I know that if I do it again, that the person who cleans the tables is going to be impacted by my action.
Yeah.
It's not just something that impacts me and something that only I deal with. So, and all of these situations, if I act out in class and I do something in class and I have to, if I'm flipping desk or do something else, but I have to come back and have a restorative conversation with my teacher and talk through, how it made me feel when you were flipping desk. I was scared when you were flipping desk in my class. Like the other people were a little bit in danger. How do you think you can fix this with your class? Instead of that kid just being thrown back into that environment, and then everyone's like awkward, and the kid thinks the teacher hates them, and doesn't like them. The teacher is mad at the kid because the kid disrupted their lesson, and so forth and so on. So it's just a continuous vicious cycle of unresolved issues that we're having. So when we do repairing the harm, and you mentioned before, some schools do it really well, and some schools don't do it as well. It's because in some cases, a kid can't just come down to the office and get a lollipop and you ask them if they had breakfast or not, and then you send them back. What I mean? It's not just a quick conversation where we ask a kid a question, we send them back. It has to be deeper and more meaningful when we're having these conversations. And that takes some training. That's not just something that, a lot of people are naturally good at talking to kids, but it involves a few more things and some more intentionality to get to the point where I'm not telling the kid how to repair the harm. I'm having the kid identify how they can repair the harm. I'm not telling the kid, say sorry to Susie. I'm having the kid come up with how they can fix it with Susie. It's more patient. It's not forcing kids, because an interesting thing that's come up lately for me in my work and talking to people like you all who are really experts in the field is forced restorative practices. So essentially, I am forcing people to say sorry when they do something wrong. I am forcing kids to do something restorative. I'm forcing the kid to clean the table. And if you don't clean the table, then I'm going to have to do this, which is the punitive side of things. So when we think about this, we just have to be aware of, how do I get a organic interaction with kids where we actually get a result that is restorative without pushing them, without using our power dynamics of being, you're going to listen to me and you're going to do what I say because I'm an adult, or I'm a white male. There's all kinds of privileges in our interactions and things like that, where you might get kids telling you what you want to hear. They might apologize and not actually mean it whatsoever, because there's that power dynamic at play, and they know that if they don't do it, then something's going to happen, right? So how do you find that fine balance is the hard part in all this.
Yeah. I think when we first started, kind of getting into restorative work and we're on the steering committee at our site, we were young, 21 and 22, trying to come up with restorative principles at our school with other administrators. And I think that's kind of where we started off, where it was almost like a flow chart, where it was like, if a child does this, this will be kind of our restorative approach. And then if they, then it's like, okay, well, if they don't do the restorative approach, how can we not use our power? That sounds bad, but it was like, how can we use what is normal in school discipline to get them to understand? And so,
I think that's where people kind of fall.
It's where you first start, because that's all you know. Yeah. So I think that part, I was like, oh man, we kind of did that.
Yeah, we sure did.
We did that. You put trash on the table, you're gonna pick it up. You don't want to pick it up, I'm calling home. You're out of here.
Here's just 10 things that you're gonna do for doing that. And it was a little bit of that forced restorative, and we kind of didn't know that understanding in the beginning, and we were kind of navigating that and saying, what can we do? We're not gonna suspend you right now, but we're gonna make you do
that's
X,
not
Y,
restorative.
Suspension is not restorative, but you're gonna get your ass out there and clean up all those tables. That is restorative, and that was so far from the truth. And I think what you were saying is that ripple effect. And when we start talking about the ripple effect and how it affects other human beings,
you start bringing in other people in those conversations.
I don't care where you work. I don't care the students you're bringing in. I've been all over. You've been all over. Brad's been all over. We have the same kids.
Yeah.
Kids do not like looking another human in the face and seeing that disappointment, seeing that, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe that we're here right now. Or, man, that kind of hurt. I don't care if it's a mentor, a coach, a janitor, a administrator, whoever it is, because one adult probably knows that kid.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the better question, or better statement. If that kid doesn't have anybody, that's on us as a school, because our school should be focusing
on being that person,
making sure every kid has one adult. Every kid has somebody that they can go to, because when it comes down to it and that kid makes a poor mistake, they don't really care about the rules. But when that person walks through the door and says, hey, you're going to talk to them on how it affected them, like, oh shit. Oh, no way. How'd you even find them? I didn't think anybody knew who that was. You know, that's what they try to do.
Yeah. And I think the only pushback I would have, and I think we were getting there a little bit earlier when we started talking about repeat offenders, right? And so when you get into restorative work and teachers or administrators run into repeat offenders, and you've done that restorative process and you've brought in other people because of the ripple effect, I think one of the questions I have is, like, as you start continuing to have those conversations, how do you teach other adults, or what advice would you give in regards to being mindful that you're going to have repeat offenders and not seeing that child. If I'm in class and Dom has spoken out of turn or got up and moved out of his seat, which happens, right? You do it now as an adult.
I do. I'm talking out of turn right now.
If that happens in class, and I've had that restorative conversation with Dom, I pulled him out of the class and, had that talk with him several times in that week. How do we as administrators or how do teachers remind themselves, like, every day is a new day? This isn't, I know I've talked to Dom 4 times this week, but you know what? I'm going to talk to him a 5th time and a 6th time and a 7th time. And it's okay if he repeats that without them feeling like, man, this stuff doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's tough because it doesn't work either to continually do something punitive as well. You're not gonna, and when we were thinking, I was thinking too, you're talking about that one adult relationship and those kinds of things. I know that we could have that, you said you don't want to look another human being in the eye and see disappointment. It's also important too to consider that when I come at a kid in a certain way, they can shut down like that.
Oh, yeah.
And people want that hammer laid down sometimes when kids are acting out and things like that. But when the kid sees that, hey, I'm trying to understand here, I'm asking open-ended questions of that kid. I'm not coming at that kid. I'm watching my body posture is not negative. My face isn't, my micro expressions are not, triggering the kid in some way. When they truly understand that we're here to have a conversation and we're here to figure it out together, it's a lot different than, I'm here because you're going to yell at me and do something to me and scream at me and I'm going to shut down. And, when that happens to me, I immediately think the other person's an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about. Screw that person.
Yeah.
And it's even true of like when, if my wife were to yell at me for, doing something or leaving a dish out or something like that, I immediately shut down. Right. If my wife were to say, hey, when you didn't when you didn't wipe out the lasagna and got the grease out, grease went down the drain. And I've talked to you about this several times before, and it kind of hurts my feelings when, I feel like you don't really respect what I'm saying to you and what this does to our sink. And that kind of makes me feel bad. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh crap. Oh man, like what did I do? Now I hurt her feelings and made her feel a certain way. But if she were to just say to me, hey, I told you 5 times already not to put lasagna in the sink before, getting the grease out before you soak it, then I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. You're freaking out about something that's not that big. And there's much bigger things in our day, and you're choosing to fix and nitpick at me for this kind of thing. It's the same thing with kids and those kind of conversations. We need to figure out why. We need to go beneath the iceberg and figure out, why is that kid talking in my class every single day? We need to find the driver of that behavior. We need to get down to the, is the kid understanding the content? Is the kid not connecting? Does the kid not feel like they're a member of the classroom community in my room? Do they feel ostracized? Do they feel like they don't understand the content? Do they feel like they don't connect to the other kids in the room? Or do they have some sort of thing they can't control? Do they have some sort of, thing where they can't sit still for 10 minutes in a row? So I need to figure out what I need to do to make sure that my class is more mobile and I'm doing things that are more tactile, or I find some kind of thing that can help that kid in particular. The reality is that I'm not going to change that behavior until I start to figure out the why behind it.
I love that.
And I'm never going to punish it out of the kid. And so that's what I tell people is that, when you plant a seed, you're not going to, some plants will grow really fast, but some plants might not even grow that year. Sometimes it might grow in 2 years when they finally, something finally clicks. So it's the long game that we need to be thinking about. And when we are intentional about this, when we're intentional about this towards the beginning of the year, you're gonna buy back time. And that's another thing people don't understand is that, and some people do, and it's a big thing with time. Every time I talk to anyone about restorative practice is because it takes longer. The time component is you buy back time, because once the more I invest up front in these kinds of things and figuring out the why, I'm not going to be seeing these behaviors in, March and April and May, because that kid now feels valued. That kid now respects me. I respect them. And I know that kid struggles with reading, and that's why they're acting out before. And I found resources And either I spent the time or I found the resources in my school or a program that can help that kid, and that kid knows that I care about them. So, and it's a famous Pam Leo quote. I don't know if you know who Pam Leo is. She's a parenting author. And I always butcher this quote, and I never said it correctly. But basically, either you're going to spend the time filling that kid's cup with love, or you're going to spend the time with all of those negative interactions and into school, writing them up, calling home, calling the principal, putting them in timeout or putting them in lunch detention. Either way, you're going to spend the time. It's just a matter of how you're going to spend that time. And are you going to put the upfront investment so I can actually teach more later? Because my class is at the point where we can focus on the learning and not the behaviors that are inhibiting me as a student and growing.
And I think that's an important thing to remember too, like for people that are listening, and as you grow in education, no matter if you're, a teacher or an administrator, is like, if I do have repeat offenders in my restorative work, it's one of those things that causes you to reflect all the time, because you're like, am I really diving deep? Am I finding the root of the problem, or am I following the steps?
What do I need to do? Where's my reflex? And I love Brad bringing the plant reference up, because I think tomorrow we should call all our freshman teachers and say thank you for not giving up on kids, because you get to see them as a sophomore, junior, senior come through your organization as you're doing it, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, look at that kid.
Yeah.
And you're like, when I had him as a freshman, let me tell you a couple things. And what usually does happen is that kid comes back and says, without you, I wouldn't have been here. Without what you've done for me, I wouldn't have been able to graduate. I wouldn't have been able to walk across the stage. I wouldn't have been able to actually say I did something well.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, as you put it in an organization, as we're 9-12, sometimes our ninth grade teachers are like, this stuff doesn't work. And we have to say, like, look at the long haul. Look at what's going on, because that is what you created.
Yeah.
You are part of this creation with the student. And as I've been thinking of this recently, and I don't know where you two kind of sit on this, my biggest fear right now is restorative work coming back from distance learning.
Oh, yeah.
Classroom management coming back from distance learning, where we are finally getting comfortable with saying distance learning isn't too bad. I think I got it. Some of my kids turn their cameras on, some of them don't, but I've relabeled what engagement is.
Yeah.
And no kids cuss me out, no kids get out of their seat, no kids are fighting, no, all those things. And all of a sudden now we're seeing schools are opening and teachers are like, oh man, what did I do?
Yeah.
Kids misbehaving. So
Yeah.
how do we promote restorative practices right now as we are about to reintegrate after a pandemic, after a year out of school? Well, how do we tell people, like, hey, we're going to try something where it's all about relationships, and this is probably going to be one of the hardest fights you've ever had because kids haven't seen each other in a long time. What are we going to do, guys? What's our thinking? What are we going to do when our kids come back, and how are we still going to hold true to the true meaning of restorative work?
Well, I'll give this a crack, because I think the expert's going to kill my answer. So I'll give it a shot. But I know that you and I have talked about this quite a bit, obviously being administrators at a school and wondering where staffing will be when students come back. But I think it's probably reminding yourself that when students, it's almost like, when you start prepping for the first day and you're like, okay, well, what activities do I want to do, and those types of things. And probably being more mindful and incorporating that into more lessons, across the first few months that you're in school, and creating a lot of time for collaboration and talk. And then I think really focusing on some of those SEL components to make sure that you are providing those times and they are meaningful and kids are getting to know each other. Thinking about what we do for the first 4 days, but thinking more like, how do I do this in my class more often? So just you're giving the time for students to talk, and then you're reflecting as a teacher, you know what, maybe our first year back from distance learning, my pacing is going to be a little off, and I'm going to spend some time on SEL and building relationships. And you know what? I'm just glad to be back, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm glad to see you. So, Brad, what else are we looking at? How are we going to motivate our teachers and say restorative still can work, and we know what we're going into, but this is the right path?
Yeah, the strange thing is that the people that have gone back to the in-person schooling, very few people have gone back to full-blown. I have my entire caseload. I have like half my kids. I have
Right.
alternate days and
Mm,
things like that. The interesting thing is that people are saying we're not seeing that many discipline problems right now.
right.
It's kind of the honeymoon phase where the kids are excited just to be
Just to be
back and
back.
just to
Yeah.
see people and things like that. And that phase is going to end and things are going to go back to normal eventually. And I would say the need for connection has never been greater
Hmm.
for these kids. So I would say that this work is always important, but I think we've experienced a collective trauma as a whole, as a world, in some capacity. And I like to say that and I didn't make up this quote by any means, but, we were all in the same boat. We were all in the same storm, but we're not
Hmm.
all in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about that, and we think about, we're all in this, storm, but our boat is I had both my parents lost my job, lost their jobs. I'm in a boat where I'm, not only am I in the pandemic, but I'm also marginalized and watching the events unfold.
Hmm.
All the events, the movements, and I'm seeing, all of these things happen, and I don't know how to, as a 9-year-old kid, I don't know how to deal with the death. Seeing people that look like me, and things
Hmm.
happening to them out in the world. So we have, not only do we have this collective trauma, but some kids have had a much more, layered trauma from everything going on. So I think just the need for the kids to feel like, I'm part of something, to feel like, I'm coming into this having experienced who knows what and what kind of variables that have happened in their lives. We need to consider that, the need for connection is going to be way more important than that curriculum component.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying we can't teach and we can't do those other things, but we do need to spend that time and humanize each other, humanize ourselves as educators. And we can talk about humanizing the curriculum and who we see in the curriculum and all those other components for hours. But, when we come back from this pandemic, there's going to be a whole lot of kids that have not interacted with each other in person in a long time.
Oh
And
yeah.
the need to do community building, the need to do circles, and the need
Hmm.
to do all of those other things is going to be very great.
Yep.
And when I establish that connection, even if I get my kids now, we can't just hit the ground running like, the kids were remote, we're good, we can come in person and just be fine. It's just a different ball game when it comes to this. So
Yeah.
I would argue that even if you're not seeing the big behaviors that you might have seen before, they're coming at some point.
Be
At some
ready.
point, are we going to be prepared because we have spent that social capital and that investment into the reintegration of kids into the learning environment, and set ourselves up for success for when things do go wrong. So I would say this is a great opportunity for us to kind of reset,
Mm.
rethink what's important in
Yep.
education.
Yep.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter what I teach and how much I teach if the kids aren't with me and the kids don't care about what it is that they're learning. They don't feel like that it's valued. They don't feel like the teacher cares about them, the school cares about them, the community cares about them. And a lot of kids just drop off as they get older in school because they don't have that sense that I belong here, that I'm part
Hmm.
of this community, that every teacher along the way has given me this message and believed in me, kind of thing. So, long story short, is the need for these practices has never been greater, and the pandemic compounded the need for connection. And restorative practices provides a medium upon which we can do those things. It's almost, and when I say almost, it's real life SEL. It
Yep.
is those skills, and people think of SEL as this thing over here. Trauma informed practices is this thing over here. PBIS is a thing over there. MTSS is a thing over there, and restorative practices are this other thing over here.
Hmm.
The reality is that restorative practices can be trauma informed. They can be, they can fit into your model of what you're trying to do. So it's just a matter of using these practices to take advantage of real life situations and build those social emotional skills instead of just like a lesson plan is great, but it's not, it's force to some extent. It's more than a curriculum. It's a way of being, a way of interacting, a way of connecting with each other and the community.
And as I hear this, the message I want people to be able to hear is, let's be proactive. Let's start saying we can do this. Let's start saying this is a positive venture. Let's say that, hey, maybe I didn't do this prior to the pandemic,
but I'm going to do it now.
I'm going to do it now.
And I'm not going to wait.
I'm not going to wait.
You know what? Why? Because I'm excited to go back.
I'm excited to go back. And I know Brad now. I know Brad, I know Dom, I know Broc in restorative work. So I hope when people hear this that they hear individuals still passionate about it. Mm-hmm. And I hope people hear that we love the work because we've seen it work.
Yeah.
And we love the work because we've been in hard situations. We're not saying, hey, this is so easy, just go try it out. It is hard.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. It involves talking and being vulnerable and time.
Emotions. I'm just going to try to keep going.
That's fine. Expression.
I don't have anything else.
That's right. Yeah.
It's all about that relationship. So as we kind of close this out tonight, Brad, tell us, send the message, send that last thing. Why restorative? Just say that last thing to hook our audience of why this has to be. That's a hard one. That's why I threw it at you.
I know Brad's like, dude, it's 10:30 here now. I don't want to do this anymore.
What's that hook for why restorative?
Why restorative? When we think about restorative practices and the why, we have been doing it in a different way for a very long time, and we're continuing to see the same result. We're continuing to see our marginalized students getting kicked out of school. We're continuing to see, I get kicked out of school once as a freshman. I astronomically increase my chance of not graduating. I get kicked out twice. And by the time I kicked out 3 times, my chance of success is 40% or so. You know what I mean? So it basically, the other thing, the simple answer is the other thing is not working.
Yep.
And we need to do something differently. And this is not just the newest trend or this thing that we're going to try that's experiential. This is proven. Yes. This has been done for a long period of time. It's just only recently become popularized in schools. Mm-hmm. It's been around for a long time in indigenous populations. It's been in the justice systems. It hasn't been introduced into the schools until recent history, and it's just something that flat out is part of who we are as educators naturally. It is that teaching kids, over content kind of mindset. It is that that kid is part of my family, and we are a family in this classroom kind of environment that you set. So it's not just an alternative to suspension or an alternative to punishment. It's a way to prioritize relationships and connections with each other, with the kids, kid to kid and teacher to student, and even in a school building with peer to peer as well. So long story short, the other stuff, it just doesn't do it. And this thing is, proven to work. It's proven to reduce these other factors. It's proven to do these things. It's just a matter of, you have to take restorative practices and go full blown into it. You can't. And we work with a guy named Dr. Luke Roberts, and he says it can't just be punitive. It can't just be, a punitive cake with restorative icing on top, and I cut through that first layer. And after I cut through that first layer, I tried to have a conversation with the kid. Now we punish him kind of thing. It has to be deep, interwoven. It has to be, built into it has to be systemic, part of systemic change in our school. So it's not something that's a quick fix. It's something that's a long game.
Yeah. And the other stuff just doesn't work.
That's what I heard.
That's what I heard.
So that's
the other
what I'm
stuff
saying.
Doesn't work.
If you loved what Brad was saying, please go check out his book. Tell us where we can find your book, Brad. Hacking School Discipline. Where is it at?
It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's on, various websites, but the main place people go to get it is Amazon.
Awesome. All right.
And Barnes and Noble too, in case anyone from Barnes and Noble is listening. But it's primarily bought online.
Yeah. All right. So please go check it out. Please dive a little bit deeper with this restorative work. I've talked to Brad prior to this. Hopefully you're going to see some type of project where my vision, his vision is, co-author's vision. We're going to start to collaborate with each other, because this has to be the norm. This
Yep.
is where education is going. And we, I promise all our listeners, Broc, myself, Brad, his co-author, are going to fight for this in any school we work with across this country, across this world. Brad, thank you so much. Cheers to you. We appreciate you.
Cheers.
We
It was
know
a pleasure
it's late.
having you.
We know it's cold for you, so good night. Bundle up. It's still warm and kind of early here, so we're gonna.
All right.
Probably
Thanks so much, and have a great night.
All right, man. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.